Our business today is to get to meet and talk to Kenan Baldridge, who is Democratic candidate for the 54th Senate District of the great state of New York. He is currently supervisor in the town of Rose in Wayne County. He has been supervisor for the last 5 years, so obviously he's gotten re-elected. And this is in a heavily Republican town, according to registration. So he must be doing something right. There are a lot of things that I can say about him, but I just want to note that he's been a fireman, a volunteer fireman for over 40 years, and he's been a school board member for 11 years, and he is, as I said already, he's currently supervisor of the town of Rose. I'm going to, in order to make things move along, I'm going to pass out some paper to anybody who has questions. If you would just jot them down, and I'm fairly good at reading all sorts of scribbles, maybe my own, which is hard to read. So I can probably manage, and if not, I'll mumble something and you can do it. This is just in case we get several questions along the same line. I'll just ask it once instead of 3 times. And so let me present to you Kenan Baldridge.
Thank you for the kind introduction. All those things were true, but not necessarily impressive. As a town supervisor, I also sit on the county board of supervisors. Being a non-charter county in the state, we have a rather interesting way of administering the county, a $160 million budget by committees. But in that capacity, I sit on a couple of committees, and I'm chair of the Health and Medical Committee. And the significance of that is I'm the only Democratic supervisor in Wayne County, and they actually dared let me be a chair of a committee. So maybe it's the one that's most expensive and it has the most problems, I don't know. But it has been an interesting ride in terms of being a Democratic supervisor in a Republican town. The town was formed in 1826, and in all those years between then and now, there have only been 3 Democratic supervisors, all in the last 2 generations. And I happen to be the 3rd one. I hope I'm not the last one, but it's a challenge. It's always an uphill battle in Wayne County for people of our party. So we learn to work across the aisle, and you wind up appealing to others on the basis of something other than party, and we find that works. I tend to walk around. I hope that doesn't ruin your camera angle there, but I can't stand still for very long. So I don't like to talk about myself too much. Let me go to issues. There's some important reasons why I'm running. And there are either 4 or 3, depending on how you group them. I'll take it to 4. And first among those issues is that of ethics reform. I'm sure you've all followed the news, what's going on in Albany, and I lost count for how many have been indicted and convicted. And then there's a next circle about those who should be indicted and convicted. But certainly someone's not setting the right example down in Albany, and I think it's time we did. And so I'm going to set the example in terms of how I think they should behave, and that begins with being a full-time senator. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a law firm. I don't have a business. I don't have another job. Right now, I'm a full-time supervisor, and that's all I do. If I'm a senator, I'll be a full-time senator, and there will be no conflicts of interest, and I don't owe anything to anybody else except the people in the district. That's a start. It's not a guarantee, but it's a start. I think that there should be some bills passed, and I think it was Assemblywoman Barbara who said she's looking for a Senate sponsor for 2 particular bills. And one is to have pension forfeiture for those legislators who are convicted of corruption, and the other is exclusion of outside income. And I will be her Senate sponsor on those bills, so we can move those along. I really think those are important to do. Some people talk about term limits. It's not a bad idea. The hard part is coming up with the right number. You want to be there long enough to be experienced so you can be effective, and short enough so you're not making a career out of it. What is that number? I don't know. But I like the idea of term limits, and we got to find that number. We'll get there through the committee process. So that's the first set of issues, and I'm sure there are many more details that we could get into. But the second is economic development. We certainly need that everywhere in New York. It's easy to say and hard to do, but we get economic development in part by making the place such that businesses are able to be here, and that goes to the question of infrastructure development or redevelopment. We've got a lot of roads that need to be repaved, a lot of bridges need to be replaced. In Wayne County, there are 4 bridges alone now across the Barge Canal that are closed because they were not maintained sufficiently. They changed the weight limits until they can't bear anymore, and then they close them. Now, if you're a farmer in Wayne County, or a businessman, or a fire truck driver, or a cop, now you've got a real problem getting the other side of the canal, and it runs the entire length of the county. Also, it cuts across Cuba County. You know where the Barge Canal is. It's a real problem if you don't have bridges to get across there. So either we're not getting our fair share of the funding pie for that kind of redevelopment, or we are, and the pie is not big enough. One or the other. But we need to get more money in infrastructure redevelopment. That also includes, in my view, water and sewerage projects. My town is now rebuilding its water system. We are getting some outside help. We're paying for some of it locally, but we're actually underway. We've already opened bids on the project. We're going to break ground this month. And so, I mean, this is an easy thing to say, but we're actually doing that. We need to do more of that in New York, and specifically the Finger Lakes area, and make clean drinking water available to everyone and the businesses as well. Not to mention the schools. We won't even get into the lead issue in schools just yet. We can go there, but not right now. And the sewerage projects, the systems, also need to be built or rebuilt, and those are very expensive as well. There is state aid available for that. Either the pie is not big enough or it's not being shared fairly. I'm not sure which, but it needs to be looked into. That's what business needs, those things. Also broadband. Who's not using the internet? Businesses certainly do. Individuals do, students do, schools do, libraries do. Who doesn't use them? I know a few people who are not on the internet. They don't care about this issue, but they're probably older than I am, and they don't care. But that, to me, that's part of the infrastructure. And it's not evenly distributed around the state. There are places in my town, I have cable in my house because there are enough people on my street to make it worth their while to do it. There are other towns, other streets in town, roads in town where you can't get them because there are not enough people on that road, they don't make any money, they're not going to do it. And you can't make them. So they're waiting for us to pay them to do it. It's kind of like the rural electrification program, if you remember that. Well, you don't remember that, but you probably read about it. That was a big benefit to people who received it. There's a benefit to the economy in general. And we're probably going to have to do something similar with cable. So that's the second. That batch of issues is, in my view, joined at the hip with this third batch, which is in protection of the environment. This has come to high profile in places like Seneca Falls. I don't know if you follow the news there, with a huge dump. I call it Mount Trashmore and Son Trashmore. There's a whole dust up about local law there and the fight that's going on about whether the dump is going to close or be relicensed and so on. Those people have had businessmen come into town, they drive into town because they think they want to be in the heart of the Finger Lakes. Beautiful place to live, beautiful place to work. They get out of the car, they smell the dump, they get back in the car, they leave, and they take their business with them. So you have to have the infrastructure available for people to be able to have their business here, and then you have to have an environment that's clean and attractive so they want to live here. And in my view, and I've already taken a position on this, it wasn't published in the paper here, but it was published in the Finger Lakes Times, that the dumps need to close and transition to a better way of handling our waste, mostly recycling. And the gas plant that is on the headwaters of Seneca Lake should not be built, in my opinion, because I think it's a risk to everybody downstream. 100,000 people use that water for drinking water. It's currently too salty for anyone over 65 or a child under 1 to be able, the health department already said, if you're in those age groups, you should not drink the water. And it's the source of drinking water for 100,000 people, and it's too salty. Puget Lake's not that bad, fortunately, but we should keep an eye on this, because Seneca Lake is the battleground for issues that are playing out everywhere in the Finger Lakes. And there are other things related to farm runoff, that we're getting blue-green algae in the Finger Lakes. We have it now in lakes in Wayne County, off of the several embankments coming off of Lake Ontario. And it's being fed by farm runoff and the warmer temperatures. So environmental issues are very important as economic development issues, in addition to just having a nice environment. If you want your businesses to be here, the wineries, the tourist business, and all the things that go with a beautiful place to live. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. If we ruin it, they're not going to come here, they're not going to stay here. So that's just not good for any of us. And the fourth, you can call that one or two issues, if you please. The fourth category is really support for education. Dan mentioned I was on the school board for 11 and a half years. My father was on 27 years before me. My mother was the first kindergarten teacher ever in our school district, and she taught 3 generations of kids, and they still remember her. So I feel very invested in education. That was my school and my time. So I plan to go to Albany as a friend of education. What does that mean? It means improving local control, because so much of what happens in your school system is controlled in Albany, not necessarily by the policymakers. I think the funding needs to be restored to the levels, at least the levels that it was at before the meltdown. We should take a really hard look at the funding formula so that the rural schools can get the money that they need. It's not clear that they're getting a fair share now. And then let me just jump to the college level, post-secondary education. We've probably all heard the discussion going on about student loans and student debt, and should we have a refinancing program and you can get a lower interest rate and this and that, and that's a good conversation, but it's the wrong conversation. I think we should be talking about financial aid. We should be talking about scholarships. We should be talking about a TAP program, and find ways to support kids going to college so that they don't have to come out in what I think is a new indenture to the banks. Pardon me. If somebody comes out of college and they're $50,000 in debt, where are they going to go? They're not going to go to graduate school. They're not going to buy a house. So, but what's that do to the housing market and all the things that go into a house? They're probably going to not buy a car. And this is a drag on the economy. It's a drag on their career. It's just not good for us. So I think we need to find better ways to finance college education. It'd be really good if we can find a way to lower the cost of it. That's a sticky wicket. But we need to address that problem. Student loans should be available, in my opinion, but they shouldn't be the primary source. Public education, in my view, has been for 150 years probably the ladder of upward mobility for our kids, and particularly the middle class and the lower economic classes that need the education to have any chance in life at all. And it's been the public school system that gives them that chance, and I think we need to support it. It's good for them, it's good for the economy, it's good for society in general. I think we've lost track of that in all this discussion about charters and private schools and so on. And I think we need to get back to the basic support of our public school system. So those are my 4 major points. I do have another issue that's near and dear to my heart. It may not be a big issue to the rest of you, but I'm a former paramedic and I'm in my 41st year in the fire department. And there are problems there too with not having enough volunteers to answer the calls. Some of the reasons for that are financial, because I don't think there's enough money to pay for training classes that are needed. And part of it is regulatory. They come out with new rules. If you haven't had this class, you can't drive that truck. It's a long story, but I think that there's been this regulatory overburden that's been placed on the volunteer emergency services, and we need to take a good hard look at that and try to lighten the load for the volunteers who want to come out and do these critical services. I used to drive every fire truck in the lot in our department. We do everything. We had the ambulance service, we got a boat, we got everything. I used to drive them all, and now they changed the rules. And all my old training has been forgotten, and I haven't had the new training, so I'm not allowed to drive the new trucks. And even though the old guys can explain to me how it works, they're not allowed to do it, because only the state has the correct information. So that's a problem. It has to be picked apart. There's no easy answer to it, but that's my pet peeve. So at this point, I should probably just stop and take questions. And if you don't have any questions, I suppose it's all right. But then you came a long way for nothing. So
I have a few questions already, and I see that there are more that are being written. I'll give you one real quick. Is satellite TV and internet a substitute, an adequate substitute for extending cable into the rural areas?
the examples I have seen of satellites would lead me to say no, or probably not. Partly because it doesn't always work, and it seems to be more expensive. I don't know that it has the capability that the broadband cable would have. I could be wrong on that, but that's my off-the-cuff list.
Okay. Okay, I'll get one here that was my first. How are you going to, and you touched on this already, but how are you going to approach changing the corruption in Albany?
I already said you set the example. That doesn't get anybody prosecuted. You pass at least these two new laws, excluding outside income, which to me, if you've got an outside business or a law firm, you're automatically compromised, even though you may not feel that way about it. And then increase the penalty for getting caught. Pension forfeiture. Sheldon Silver's going to go to jail, and we're going to pay him while he's there, just because that's the way the law is. There's an interesting little twist that would require a constitutional amendment, state constitutional amendment. Attorney General is not allowed to prosecute these corruption cases. That's why the federal prosecutor is doing it. Now, the Attorney General has been trying to work around the back door and come in a different way, but he shouldn't have to. So we could always propose that constitutional amendment. That requires 2 to probably 3 years to get done, even if you have a majority, just because of the process. But it seems to me that we've got this great resource in the Attorney General's office to be able to do that, and we're not able to use it. So I think those are 3 places to start anyway.
I got a question I'd like to ask. I'm a farmer here in the township, and of course my interest in government taxes, I'd like to see them maintained so they would maybe go down. And I happen to have a son that's working up in the nano lab up in Sweeney, Albany, a joint venture between private enterprise and the state. And some of those private companies are pulling out of this project because they said the state's not handing up their portion of the money. And, the machine you're brought in, that they're working on, makes computer chips. And they're teaching students how to use this thing. And it's an $80 million machine, so it takes some money to get this thing going. So he says the state is not paying in, and I've heard this often, the states show the money here and there and everywhere else. And so how can you fix bridges or whatever if the state doesn't have any money other than come back to tax to the people and ask for more money? And I'm not in favor of that.
Well, he didn't say they didn't have the money. He said they weren't paying.
No, I've heard of other ways where they just don't have the money to do stuff.
Governor said we had,
The money to go into these projects to make businesses go across the state in different zones, the money's not there. Dirt Week, for example, is a race week this week, and the venture between the state and an individual in upstate New York here said the state's not paying. It's time after time after time they don't have the money to put in these projects. It's pretty tough to do anything unless you come back to the taxpayers for more money.
well, the governor said he had $2 billion surplus, if you may recall. And they sure came up with the money to rebuild the Tappan Zee Bridge. So I don't believe they don't have the money. I think that maybe there's a shell game going on for the benefit of the projects or whoever's in charge. I don't believe they don't have the money. But your other point is going back for new taxes. I would agree with you there. I don't go to taxes first for a solution. And last night, my town budget just passed it for a preliminary budget, and we're not changing the tax rate at all. We're getting by. Now it's only town instead of the state, but my attitude is I don't go to taxes first for the solution. I think we've got to find some internal responses.
Okay. There are a number of written questions. Could you define the boundaries of the Senate district you're running for?
I can tell you who did it.
He's a geographer, so he should be able to do that precisely.
Okay, you all got your mental models of the map of the Finger Lakes? Okay. It's all of Wayne County, most of Ontario, from the eastern, from Geneva, all the way over to just west of Canandaigua. The Bloomfields and Victor are not included. All of Seneca County, the Republican third of Cayuga County, which is the western third and the southern part, the town of Lansing, and the town of Webster in Monroe County. Clear? That's about a 2.5-hour drive, okay?
And Lansing is the only town in Tompkins County that is part of that district. And this, I'll add to this discourse, it's due to the redistricting after each decennial
Census.
thank you, census. Senior moment.
And it's
The legislature is the one that does it. And Tompkins County seems to be a favorite one for being chopped up.
We're in 3 different Senate districts.
Pardon?
We're divided into 3 different Senate districts.
3 different Senate districts right now.
and that's not by coincidence.
No.
Yeah. I think
So this is a majority Republican district. It's an uphill battle for me. Although I will tell you two things. One is town of Rose is a majority Republican town. Yet I defeated the Republican incumbent because there were enough people willing to look at the issue and the candidate rather than the party. And that really is where it is. And I'm optimistic enough, at this point at least, to say I think that can happen in this majority Republican district. Then there's another interesting little fact that just happened 2 days ago, I think. Board of Elections just certified the primary results from the September 13th election. I don't know how closely you followed that. Last spring, when Zolio said he was not going to run again, there were, I think, 14 Republicans threw their hat in the ring. And they went through this whole process of a convention. Out of the convention, they picked one designated candidate, and there were 7 who didn't agree. So then the legal process is you file petitions, you know, minimum 1,000 ballot signatures, which we all had to do. And kudos to the Lansing Committee. They came up with the most signatures of any other town in my district. And so really started I had the support of all the committees in the district. So I had 1,951 signatures and I only needed 1,000. That proved to be essential because there were challenges to the petitions. And there's a legal process for doing it. I won't bore you with the details. But the Senate Republican Committee went in and challenged, I think, 4 of the Republican candidates, and they challenged my Democratic challenger. I do not know why. And they knocked 2 of the Republicans and my challenger off the ballot. And they even went to court. I mean, they filed a challenge, and then the Board of Elections would schedule an appeal, a hearing. Then they sued the Board of Elections and the candidate to prevent the hearing from being held. They just wanted you off the ballot. Well, 2 of the Republicans were knocked off, and even though they appealed, they went to court, they lost. My opponent didn't go to court because it would cost him $10,000, or maybe a 1 in 10 chance of winning, so he was out. I had 1,951 signatures, so I'm still here. So then there were 5 Republicans who went to primary. It was close. There were 2 who they came in first and second by only 190 ballots, and there were some allegedly 1,000 absentee ballots out there. They went through a whole court process to vet those, and one of the candidates finally won at 120 votes. The other candidate, just as an aside, also primaried on the Reform Party line and won that. So now we have 2 Republicans running, and me. So this is going to be an interesting year. Who knows? We can all speculate about how it's going to turn out, but it sure is going to be interesting.
Who are the 2 Republicans?
Pam Helming, from the town supervisor from Canandaigua. She was designated candidate coming out of their convention. The Republican Senate Committee spent $300,000 on her behalf for the primary. I've been told they've got $1.5 million more to back up for this election. They want to keep the seat. The challenger who almost made it and did make it on the Reform Party line is Floyd Rayburn, a businessman, a masonry contractor from, I think it's town of Stanley, also in Ontario County, not far from Canandaigua. And to the best of my knowledge, he intends to stay in the race. And since he's got a whole lot more money than I have, he probably is going to make a really aggressive, I assume he's going to make an aggressive challenge out of it. Meanwhile, my Army of Volunteers and I are going around promoting our program, and we'll see what happens. It has been a very negative primary campaign. There's been a lot of daggers being thrown, and we just kept a low profile doing that. Don't want any part of that. But pretty soon they'll probably start throwing them at me. So
I'm probably the only Republican in the room. But,
my mother was a Republican. It's okay. All right.
I was part of that process with Pam Helming, and it really turned a lot of our party members off because there was so much state involvement in it. And actually we had Mike Sigler from Lansing was actually part of the original
one of the 14. Yeah.
One of the 14, but he got knocked out right away that night when we went to Geneva, which was a wasted trip because it was all done before we got there. But however, we're only 3% of your district here in Lansing. Nizzolio was always very good to us, and he was always present here. But I think a lot of the Republicans are rather disenfranchised at this point in time with what happened with Pam Helming, because it's more or less, it was a bought nomination.
You said that, not me.
No,
okay?
that's the feeling from a lot of people. So that's why I'm here tonight to listen to you, because I haven't made up my mind who I'm voting for yet. But I'm just really upset about the way the weighted voting and everything went. It wasn't like you went there and each person had one vote. Some of the people up in the Ontario County or the county where she's from, 10,000. If they were in a district that was heavily Republican. So I don't think there was anything fair about it at all. And I think that it's really going to be a race to watch because I'm not sure what Floyd's going to do. I don't think Floyd's going to put any more money out there. I think he's put quite a bit out there, but his name's on the ballot.
Yeah.
So. And he has a lot of he has a lot of same values that you have as far as the corruption and all of that kind of stuff. So I think it's going to be a very interesting race.
I have to give Floyd credit for being willing to buck the establishment. I mean, I've met, I don't know him well. I've met them all because we go to the same events and disagree reasonably.
Right.
But so he's always been a gentleman to me. I assume that he's kind of, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound.
Yeah, he's just waiting, he's just sitting back and
We'll see.
seeing what's gonna go. But the problem with the primary was, if two of the other ones had dropped out of that primary, it might have gone a different turn, but with the other two, it sort of took votes away from it.
My colleague on the Board of Supervisors, Brian Magdalo, is a Lionstown supervisor. He came in third,
Right,
and he's probably thinking exactly that,
yeah.
because Wayne County is the big gorilla in the Republican ranks there. So I'm glad you're here. I hope you like what you hear, and while I'm at it, let me tell you a couple more things. All right? I'm not getting any money out of Albany or New York City. All my money comes from small donations, and most of it comes from here within the district. So my attitude is, if I go down to Albany, you're the only people I owe. I don't owe Albany anything. And people, in a different context, people have told me, you'll go down to Albany and they'll tell you what to do. And my response to that is, the only person who can tell me what to do is my wife. Everybody else gets an argument. The people I grew up with know that. So that's my attitude.
There are a couple questions having to do with energy, the environment, and our electric power station. So I'll read this. Lansing has an electric power plant which has been a significant contributor to town and school taxes. It is currently slated to be closed. What are your ideas about shoring up our tax base as well as jobs while continuing to phase out fossil fuel? Before you answer that, I'll give you another one so
I can escape that one?
yeah, you can dance between them all.
Okay.
What is your position on fossil fuels as a versus cleaner energy sources? And what is your position on fracking, on shale gas pipelines? Okay, so I think there's a connection there.
Kind of a tour of the horizon on energy. Clearly, we're addicted to fossil fuels, and for good reason. I mean, it powered the Industrial Revolution. There was good reason to do that, but we know a lot more than we used to, and we have some options now that we didn't have before. It's clear to me that coal is an industry that's on its way out. It's just too dirty, it's dangerous. Coal mining is the most dangerous industry in the country. And whether you believe in global warming or not, we've already had plenty of pollution in the air, courtesy of coal. So it's a technology that is dated and is on the way out. And I think the problem to us is how we respond to that. Can we transition to something better? And then it includes the jobs, the tax base, and another form or several forms of energy to replace it. It's easy to say we should have renewables. They have their problems. Solar only works when the sun shines, wind only works when the wind's blowing, and mini hydro was phased out a long time ago because it wasn't economical. Maybe there's a way to bring it back, but they all have their limitations, which is why you usually come up with a mix. Nuclear power was thought to be the answer a long time ago. Some people are calling it green now because it doesn't emit carbon. I can't bring myself to do that. But I would hazard the opinion that nuclear power is on the way out too, just because it's so expensive. And you have to go all the way back to where they dig the uranium out of the ground. And the whole supply chain is just really expensive. And there are a lot of environmental issues related to that. I don't think anyone's building any new nuclear plants, at least in this country. We can extend the life of them, and it wasn't just done with the nuclear plants in Oswego County and also the one DNA plant in Wayne County. They're buying a few years to make the transition. We have a similar problem with the nuclear plant in Wayne County. It pays a lot of money to the town of Ontario, to the Wayne Central School District, and to Wayne County. But everybody, all the leaders of those organizations understand that what they've got is a 5-year closing period. And we've got to make a transition in that time. Well, how do you do that? You've got to get some other industry in there to replace it. And what's it going to be? You can generate electricity from solar fields, but you don't get many jobs out of those. It's still useful to do, but you aren't going to get many jobs out of it. You got to find your job somewhere else. back to my original 2 points, economic development and the environment. Let's take what we have that's really good and double down on it. And we've got a really great agricultural community, whether it's apples or soybeans or wine, grapes, or, you know, there are a lot. This part of the state grows everything, just about everything. We don't have artichokes, all right, but everything is produced in New York is produced in this area. And we can take that and increase the value of the product. The grapes go to wine, apple goes, there's a budding apple cider, hard cider industry. We do more of that. There's a lot of electronics. Photonics is made in Rochester. We don't know where they're going to manufacture yet, but that's a technology of the future. So we're going to have to look to some other industry to replace the jobs that are coming out, that are going to lose in coal and the nuclear plants. In terms of the energy, I think we have to go to renewables. We shouldn't rush headlong into that. They are currently not economically viable unless there's a government subsidy. My town has voted for a solar project to produce all the power the town government uses except the street lights, and I can explain that to you. It wouldn't make sense otherwise, but I've signed the contracts on it. We're on the construction schedule. We're going to have solar arrays in our town to produce electricity. The only way that works is that it goes out to the grid. When they use it, we get credit for the dollar value of that, which we then apply to our bill. Does that kilowatt produced out there actually come and put the lights on in my office? Probably not. It's going to go somewhere, but it works. That works. The grid becomes your storage battery. We can do a lot more of that, and we probably should. Wind power, there are several. There's a place in Geneva that has 2 wind turbines. There's a place at Harbeck Harbeck Plastics in town of Ontario, in Wayne County, has got 2 very large wind turbines. They make it work. I don't have the details on the dollar figures there, but they make it work. So this has potential. That was a broad question. Gas, fracking and the pipelines. I don't see any benefit to people here for fracking or the pipelines. The purpose of that, you have to understand the price of gas is really low because there's a glut on the market now. Really low, we don't need gas here. We just signed contracts, again in our town, we have a 2-year energy supply contract. The price of electricity went down a penny per kilowatt, and the price of gas went down for 1,000 therms, I think it was, for 2 years. That's how low the price of gas is, at record lows. Why would you want to go through all the fracking in order to produce low-value gas? Well, the answer is they want to run it down to Philadelphia, put it on ships, and send it to China. Okay, nice that the Chinese would buy a product from here, but there are a lot of problems with getting the gas and sending it there. Who gets the problems? We get the problems. And we don't even know what they all are right now. We know some of them are, but we don't know all of them are. So if you're getting problems, a Texas company is getting profits and the Chinese are getting the gas, where's the deal in there? So I can't see one. I can't see a benefit for us on that. So.
You mentioned some of the agricultural products and so forth in this area, and one question is, do you have an agricultural background?
Personally, no, except that my town is surrounded by farms, and I've been in farms, but I've worked on farms, not for long. I mean, Dad was a carpenter and his friends were farmers, and I picked cherries out in the summertime. I rode my bike out, my brother rode his bike out, and we were old enough we could get a work permit, so we were allowed to work 4 hours a day, legally. So I worked 8, he worked 10. 30 cents.
And you want to go to the Senate?
And that's, between that and construction work, that's real incentive to finish school. So we did. But that's the extent of my work on a farm, except I did carpentry work for a few years and worked for farmers, but that's really it. I don't claim to be an expert on that. I have learned through the years, though, that this is a very diverse area. You may see just a few products here, but in this whole district, we've got a broad range of food that we grow. We feed a lot of people. You got the apples, you got cherries, you got pears, and other smaller orchards. You've got just about every vegetable you could think of. You've got blueberries, raspberries, I don't know how many kinds of grapes we got. All kinds of new apples being produced, and Cornell, you know, the Geneva Experimental Station is really instrumental in that.
Cabbage is far as north.
Lots of
That's about
cabbage.
the only thing.
Just about everything that's produced in New York is produced in this district. So I don't know what else to say at that point. We need to support the farmers.
There are a couple questions regarding disposal of waste. Regarding dumps, what do you do with all of our waste? Can we recycle more? And here's one in particular about closing Seneca Meadows. Are you familiar with that issue?
Seneca Meadows? Yes.
Yeah. So the two I'm putting together.
Okay. It's my understanding that it's possible to recycle about 80% of what is currently thrown away. The economics of it might not be quite there yet, but we can certainly recycle much more than we currently are. The issue with these three dumps, the Seneca Meadows in the Seneca Falls town, the Ontario County landfill, which I think in Town Hall between Geneva and Canandaigua, and High Acres in the town of Macedon, which is in Wayne County, is not that we need a place to get rid of our trash. We do, but the problem is they're bringing it in by railroad car from other places, New York City, probably Toronto, and they're looking to expand. Is that the kind of, well, if they pay. I mean, these companies, hey, NAFTA works both ways. And Seneca Meadows, at least, is owned by a Texas company. So why do we want to be the dumping ground for all this trash? Seneca Meadows is the biggest landfill in all of New York. 40% of the landfill capacity in New York is right up there in Seneca Falls. And the residents of Seneca Falls have figured out that that's not a great deal. There is a community benefits agreement, they do pay money, but you know, I was up there for a Seneca Falls Town Board meeting, and I spoke against, or in favor of passing local law number 7 to in a different way, basically close that landfill. It was a warm night, the doors of the gym were open, and the wind was in the right direction, and everybody in that meeting could smell the landfill that was 3 miles away. So, and if you drive anywhere near there, you're going to smell it. That's where people drove there, got out to see what they wanted to bring their business to that town. They got back in the car and left. So do we want the 54th to be the dumping ground for New York State? That's New York City trash going in there. I don't think we want that. I don't think that's the kind of industry we want, and what I think is the best real estate in the world. This is some of the best farmland in the world. Why would you want to put trash on it? That said, we got to do something with our trash. I think we could recycle a great deal more, and if we change some of our approaches, maybe it doesn't become trash, it becomes reused instead. And then for the limited amount that remains, we can have a much smaller landfill, or I hate to say the word incinerator, but some other way is more manageable than this huge mountain of trash. There are 2 mountains up there, and it's not hard to see that there's going to be a third one if this law doesn't pass. I spoke in favor of that law because my town is downstream of that landfill, and what they call the juice,
The leachate.
if it leaks, it goes through the liner, and anything built by man can fail. It's headed for my town, and my town's drinking water supply comes on wells. Some when they're shallow, 2 or deep, but they're in the way. And anybody who lives off of drinking water wells in between is going to get it first. Once it's in the ground, you're never going to get it out. So the prevention goes a long way. That wasn't quite all of the question.
Well, what should be done about recycling all of our waste, and I think think you did a good
I think we can do a lot more on recycling, and that'll help preserve the jobs of landfill workers too. Put a recyclery on that location. So.
Could I speak to that? I worked in solid waste management for about 15 years here in the county, and I think we have probably one of the most progressive and aggressive recycling, reuse, and waste reduction programs anywhere in upstate New York. And having seen the difficulties that we've had with the up and down market situation, because recycling produces secondary materials that then go into the secondary materials market, which are international. A lot of our materials go to China or Mexico or Africa or wherever the best price is paid. And with an economic downturn, there were virtually, our markets locally pretty much dried up. I mean, for our local materials dried up because we couldn't get the stuff out of here. There was nobody to buy it. So you can recycle more, but you're going to have the markets that will buy the stuff be willing to use it. You have to have consumers who are willing to buy the products that are made as out of secondary materials, and we still have a really long way to go. There's been a step up in trying to capture more textiles because about 20% of our waste as municipal waste is actually made up of textiles, which is kind of horrifying. That's clothing, old clothing and carpeting and stuff like that.
Because nobody repairs it anymore.
Well, nobody repairs it, but we also buy disposable clothing. It's very cheap, it's made in China or Thailand or somewhere else, and we wear it for a season, we throw away. Those markets are growing, and places like Salvation Army and the textile companies in New York State have been pushing really hard. They have a major program to capture more textiles. With that plus, an aggressive composting program where you can take household waste that you can't compost in your backyard, such as meat and bones, and that can go to a very large-scale facility that can turn it into a good soil amendment. But all of those cost a lot of money. They have huge problems in educating the public about what goes in and what doesn't go in. And it's really easy to say, well, we just should establish a recyclery on that landfill. It's a lot easier said than done because of the way the markets work and the way the material flow goes through our hands as a society. So we have to change a lot of things in our society before we can get to 80% recycling. We're at about 58% waste reduction in Tompkins County through all the other means, everything added together. But we're still not anywhere near 80% reduction by recycling.
Sure.
So that stuff that's going to Seneca Meadows, if it doesn't go there, it's going to go to somebody else's backyard. There's always somebody's backyard, and that's the tough thing about this whole issue.
It should just be ours, not Toronto's.
Well, and you can't ban it from coming in because of interstate commerce. So you can't tell Toronto they can't ship it here. Pennsylvania can't, and New Jersey can't not be told they can't ship here because of interstate commerce clauses.
You're right there, but the town of Seneca Falls can decide they don't want any more landfills.
They can.
Good points. One of the speakers that related to Seneca Meadows pointed out that they recycle tires, they grind them all up, and they put it on the commodity market, but they can't sell it, and they use it as cover at the landfill. But that's not recycling, that's just more landfill.
That's just a beneficial
right.
use.
It's a commodity market, I understand, and there are ups and downs. Here's something we could do. This is really aggressive, well, two things. One is really aggressive and one not so much. One of the things you could do is require companies, if they sell something, they have to take it back.
Right. We're getting
And they'll figure out how to reuse it real fast. I'm think about Coke bottles. The second thing is, the state has a tremendous list of state bid items. I buy computers on state bid. Hospitals can buy pharmaceuticals on state bid. You can buy needles on state. You can't buy them, but they can buy them on state bid. Tremendous list of state bid items. There have to be specifications there. If we change the specifications to require more recycled content in some of those, you can't do it with the medical stuff, but in some of those, then that would improve the commodity market. It's not a guarantee, but that's something we could do to influence it and on the pull side of the market. So you're right, it's not easy. But my argument is, the broader argument is, I remember the old dumps. When a town found a gully or a swamp they didn't like, it was probably on the wrong side of the tracks, and then in it went. Eventually somebody came along and they touched off the fire, so you had an ongoing smudge pot for the rest of the year. That transition to a landfill where they started covering it every day, they didn't really worry about anything else. That kept the rats away. And then they came up with the idea of a sanitary landfill where they're actually going to have liners. Now, they don't use the word sanitary anymore, but they're lined landfills, and they're much better than they used to be. Yes, they are engineered, and they're much better than they used to be. My argument is that's a technology that has benefited us. It was better than before, but it's now done. And we need to transition to the next technology, which is reuse and recycling. I don't have all the answers on that, but I think that's where we need to go and develop the answers.
I am old enough to remember a big ad campaign by Porsche, who claimed that one of their models was completely recyclable. I'm not in the market for a Porsche, so I can't tell you from personal experience. What about your Porsche?
No, I just want to make sure we get through the questions that were written.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so if
We
somebody's
will,
watching
I
time.
will. But I haven't seen anything more about that.
Well, I don't know, but in the fire service, we recycle a lot of cars. We take them apart on the highway and they go to the junkyard where they get crushed and returned.
Uh-huh.
So, that was a joke, come on.
Okay.
We take lots of cars apart.
What will or can you do in the New York Senate to address unfunded mandates that fall from the state level to the local level?
A lot of those originate in Washington, and Medicaid is always the great example of that, which it's developed at the federal level, and the Congress decides the funding share. It's going to be like 50% Fed, 25% state, and the rest is on the locality. In our case, it's the county. You can always do some pushback by trying to get your congressional delegation to do something with that. But there are other things that some mandates are unfunded, some are underfunded, and the only thing you can do is and make a lot of noise to improve the funding level. I was in North Carolina many years ago, and we were talking about the ambulance service there, and they told me there that the state had a law that said if the state requires it to be on the ambulance, the state had to pay for it. So we could try that, not just with ambulances, but schools. I mean, in the school district, we found out that they didn't pay 100% of anything. You had to do it, and then they would decide what share they were going to pay. So the only way you can beat that is to push back. I mean, there's no easy answer for that.
Who do you think should pay for Medicaid?
State or the county?
State or the county? That's a three-tier. The feds pay a lot of it, and the state pays about half the remainder, and the county pays the balance. And to my way of thinking, if the feds want that program, the feds should pay for it. I can't influence that except to talk to our congressional delegates and say, this is the only fair way to do it.
It's my understanding from our county representatives that that the state of New York pushes an unusually large portion of the Medicaid payments down to the counties, which is exacerbating our problems here.
As I understand it, each state gets to decide kind of the breadth of coverage in Medicaid, and we are one of the more generous states, yeah. But do we want people to not have the health care, or do we just want all of them to pay it? I mean, you can narrow the scope of the coverage, and then you've got uncovered conditions, which is a different kind of problem, or we can just insist that the state pay for all of it.
What about single payer?
Some people recommend it, I don't. The reason I don't is because I've seen enough examples of, that's essentially a monopoly. And I've seen enough examples of that in Canada and Britain where you just lose any incentive for efficiency. And having worked in healthcare, I've seen costs go down through the competitive process. The insurance companies are not going to pay the hospital $300 a day for one bed night. They say, we're only going to pay you $85. And they can make a stick because they've got the volume. So the hospital's got to figure out a way to lower the cost. They didn't do that until the insurance companies made them. So I think single payer sounds great in the beginning. The risk is it's going to wind up like the VA, where it's everywhere and it's unaccountable. So I'm not a fan of single payer. I want everybody covered by insurance, but I think we have to keep the competitive elements there. You don't have to agree, that's all right. But
Okay.
That's a fair point.
What solutions would you propose to address the imbalance of state funding between downstate and upstate?
It's often believed that we're not getting our fair share of state revenues. But if you look especially at the school districts, you'll see that we're the beneficiaries of downstate money. It's really the other way around. We would not have the school districts we have if we didn't have their money to work with. So I think that maybe that's not quite the issue that people think it is. We're getting a lot of money from downstate. Which doesn't mean we shouldn't look at it from time to time, all right? But my school district has buildings they would never have if we had to pay for them locally.
Would you continue to support Senator Nozzolio's push on the Sampson's Veteran Ceremony at a fully funded state cemetery?
I would. Is that too easy?
What do you think about term limits? Say 2 terms, and then you need to take a sabbatical for 2 terms, and then you could run again? I think that's the thrust of the question.
Well,
If it isn't, correct me.
okay, I like the idea of term limits. I'm not sure 2 is the right number because it takes you a while to really understand what's going on and develop the relationships to have some influence. I don't have a magic number. Others have come up with numbers, but I think that it should be enough to become experienced and not enough to become a career. And somewhere in there, we're going to find a number that everyone can agree on. So I don't have a neat number of our terms for it.
What are your ideas on funding of infrastructure? Tax on, I claimed I could read it, but I...
Gasoline.
Oh, on gasoline, thank you. And how will it be funded? Funding of...
Start that again, funding
By
of
roads and bridges,
Oh, okay.
I presume.
I'm not a fan of raising taxes. I'm more a fan of trimming the waste in other areas. Now, waste is usually somebody else's pet project. That's usually how it gets in there. But there's such a shell game going on with appropriations that I think the money's in there. And it's a question of priorities. And to me, infrastructure is a very high priority because it allows business to operate, and you get economic benefits from that, and you get more tax money back. There have been a lot of boondoggles coming in Albany, and we got to get rid of those. So if we have an increased tax on fuel, whether it's gasoline or diesel, or even some kerosene, yes, it's an incentive to drive less, but we're in a position where it's hard to drive less in a rural area. So all that does is raise the cost of operating, whether it's me personally or your business or your farm. I don't think that's the way to go.
Okay, I'm...
On a written question?
Back to taxes.
Okay.
What is your view on tax reform?
You got to be more specific. Everybody wants tax reform, but what does that really mean?
Well, an example would be the election law as it pertains to closing loopholes for limited liability corporations, campaign financing, but then also just the existing tax structure to generate, closing loopholes there to generate additional revenue to fund infrastructure and social service programs in the state, and you're under an unfunded mandates.
Carried interest.
Pardon?
Carried interest.
Sorry, I threw a bunch of stuff together.
Yeah, let's start with the LLCs. Okay, you all know what that is, the LLC loophole. Okay, you can form an LLC and you two can join it. You can give him all the money you want. He gives it to whoever he wants, and you'll never be identified. And that means that if you want to grease the palms of somebody in high office, you can do it anonymously. And you do that through campaign contributions through the LLCs. And I'm not getting any either, by the way. But that's one of the ways, you don't buy an election, but you can sure make it easier. And I think that should be closed. At the very least, they should have to disclose identities, and I'd rather see it as plain closed. That's more a question of ethics than it is of taxes, but that happens to be the vehicle for it. As for tax loopholes, everybody's benefit is somebody else's loophole. So, yeah, it's easy to say we close these and we'll get more revenues, and there are some good examples of really egregious abuses of it, but anybody getting started?
Yeah.
Okay, that's somebody else's loophole. That's my benefit, but it might be your loophole. If you're getting a deduction off of your second home or your condo up at Saranac Lake, maybe we don't need to have a tax benefit for that. Others would argue, developers would argue against it and say that generates a lot of benefit to the economy. So I like the idea of going through those, taking a good hard look at them, and frankly, I'd rather get rid of those. But it'd be a tough nut to crack. Not that we shouldn't try, but there's a lot of defenders of those loopholes.
Somebody back there again?
Yeah, I have a specific question about the New York State Thruway. I'm a farmer and I haul grain, the trucks, and we use the thruway sometimes. And it's approved by the New York Truck Association. Every time the Thruway Authority raises the rate and the thruway revenues go down. My question is, why don't you either get rid of the revenue on the thruway or lower it to a fee that's acceptable to myself?
This is part of the shell game that goes on in Albany. Every time the thruway makes a profit, they do something in Albany to add to the domain of the thruway so they don't have a profit anymore. And that savings accrues to the Department of Transportation, which they then move somewhere else. So the thruway has been successful, so they keep adding more cost onto it so that you never get the benefit of what you paid. Thruway was supposed to be free by now.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a professor who said to me, we're coming up on the deadline, and he said, it'll never happen because all those guys in the Thruway Authority are making big bucks on their salaries, and they went out and they bonded a whole lot of work for the next 20 years so that you couldn't stop with the tolls. This is part of the Albany shell game.
Well, one of my concerns is, and there should be everybody in this room, Thruway is probably one of the greatest roads in the United States. I've traveled around the country a lot. And heavy trucks especially, like come out of this town, ought to be on that road if they're going anywhere east or west. And it would be a benefit to each of us that they weren't on the two-lane roads and not.
Sure.
Yeah.
Some of our trash trucks.
And if the shell game stopped and they stopped it, like the Tappan Zee Bridge, if they stopped adding these things to the thruway would have the money to do the maintenance and things that it should be doing. And you all remember the bridge that fell down?
Yes.
Okay?
Sorry.
Yeah. And I didn't drive over that bridge. I was driving over the replacement around it. Then they wouldn't have to be raising tolls because the state would stop adding on to what they're supposed to do with their money. This is just part of the shell game. And this goes to the question of who's in the leadership. And that's not a good answer for you, I understand. But if they stop doing that, then they wouldn't need to raise the tolls.
Why don't we put this part of the program to rest? Anybody that wants to come up and talk privately with Kenan can do so. Is it too gross to mention that there's an envelope there? And anybody who feels like they have an itching checkbook can write one and put it in his campaign.
And if you want to do it a different